It's an honor to be here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Holly Samuelson. I'm an associate professor of architecture at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and we at Harvard have been working with the International Finance Corporation on rethinking the definition of net zero carbon for buildings. So today, first we're going to hear from the IFC, an introduction, then I will introduce our Harvard team, and then we'll have about an hour presentation about our research that we've conducted over the past year. Please feel free to write any questions you have in the chat or the question and answer section. We'll have a question and answer at the end, and we'll have some follow-up thoughts by the IFC. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Zieb Nguyen Van Hoot, Senior Manager of Climate and Business in the Department of the International Finance Corporation, for a few words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Holly. Great to be here today and welcome everyone to this session. I'm Zieb Nguyen Van Hoot, Senior Manager of the Climate Business Department at the IFC, which is the private sector lending arm of the World Bank Group. The World Bank lends and supports development projects to governments in emerging markets or developing countries, and the IFC provides support to developing projects through private sector companies in emerging markets. Today's topic begins with a critical and often complex question: what does zero carbon really mean? Is it about net zero operational emissions? Is it about whole life cycle emissions, offsets? Standards are evolving, and so are expectations. What's clear is this: the building sector must decarbonize. It's responsible for nearly 40% of global energy-related emissions. And this isn't just a future challenge. 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 are already standing today, which means we must retrofit and future-proof what we already have. That's where IFC comes in. Our role is to unlock private sector solutions to global development and climate challenges. Through programs like EDGE Green Building Certification and Building Resilience Index, which my team will present later today, we provide the tools, data, and certification to support low carbon, resilient, and affordable buildings at scale. And through our investment and advisory work, we help channel finance toward climate-aligned construction and retrofits. IFC doesn't just define green, we work to mainstream it, especially in emerging markets and developing countries, where populations and construction growth are the highest. Today's session will explore how developers, banks, and governments can define, measure, and pursue zero carbon, and what it takes to move from ambition to action. Thank you again for joining us today and for being part of a global movement to transform the built environment. Back to the team. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zieb, for outlining that challenge so clearly. And thank you to the IFC for your leadership in this space. So now I'd like to introduce the Harvard team. So we have Dr. Mayuri Rajput. She's a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Graduate School of Design. We have Stephen Early IV. He's a Master of Architecture student at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And we have Dr. Ying-Yan Chu, or just Chu, as we call him. He's a postdoctoral fellow in environmental science and engineering at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science, and he's working with us at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over now to Chu, and remember to please write in your questions as we go along, and we have enough time to address a number of questions at the end. Thank you. Over to you, Chu.
Hi, thank you, Holly. Hi, my name is Chu, and it is my great honor to be here to share some of our recent ongoing research collaborated with IFC and ASHRAE. Actually, our talk is about the definition of net zero carbon buildings. What we are thinking is trying to understand how the definition could contribute positively to the decarbonization process of building sector in a wide range. Currently, most of the countries have already claimed carbon neutral target towards the 2050 or 2060. And in the building sector, demonstration buildings to achieve a net zero have been seen in most of the countries technically, but how the large amount of buildings could work towards that remain a challenge. Edge have a lot of experience on the emerging market and understand it deeply on this challenge in the complex social, economic, or in the climatic context. So it is still worth to rethink the definition of net zero to understand how this changing or the concept would bring opportunities and challenges to the real world. Different countries and cities are all trying to develop or upgrade their building standards and building codes to allow the large amount of buildings to join in this decarbonization process. So by learning the detailed how these standards are set and understanding the specific requirements within these frameworks could offer valuable insights for other countries and cities in marking the similar path. And this analysis can be especially useful for cities just starting their decarbonization efforts and helping them better understanding potential strategies and future decisions. Another important point is that the building sector have a strong connection with the country's overall energy plan and building budgets, and the relationship between these can be quite complex. When we plot the energy generation per capita and the grid carbon intensity, we can see from this chart, especially for these emerging market countries, some of them may have quite green grid, which powered by hydro, but at the same time, they may do not have enough energy consumption, and due to the climate changes, some places even suffer electricity shortage in dry seasons. And this clearly means that a cleaner grid does not necessarily mean that the building energy efficiency can be ignored. The interplay between grid decarbonization and building energy use is intricate at this point. In addition, achieving carbon neutrality involves more than just meeting targets within individual buildings. New tools and broader concepts are developing, trying to address this complexity. For example, ISO 14068 introduced a carbon neutral aligned concept. If a sector's actual carbon is traced annually or year by year, it could allow a reduction credits or a kind of reduction plans towards its final target of net zero. Within this path, it could be defined as carbon neutral aligned. This approach expands the definition of carbon neutrality and enables a broader participation, making it possible for more buildings, especially for retrofits or projects cannot achieve final target directly, to join the decarbonization path. So, facing this changing world, our research objective is to evaluate this definition, to analyze the trend and the concept behind this, and trying to trying to identify the implication and opportunities for wider impact of carbon neutral targets, that including the emerging markets. Our work divided into three parts. First, clearly, we're trying to go into deeply review the recent published net zero carbon related standards to understand how these principles are changes and what are the key features. And second, we're trying to collect data from real world city and to make comparisons about these key metrics to understand how strict these targets are and how challenging they were to the emerging markets. And third part, we're trying to collect a series of interviews from experts to really understand how these changes and concepts may impact in a practical situation. The first part is about reviewing all the standards. We're trying to understand how these concepts of net zero are evolving. These are the 6 standards that we are mainly involved in. The first, of course, is the ASHRAE 228, which is published in 2027. It's a standard method of evaluating net zero energy and net zero carbon building performance. Also, last year, the U.S. Department of Energy also published a definition of zero-emission buildings, which set minimum criterion that public and private entity could adopt. And also different states and cities also try some efforts towards their carbon neutral target, among which the most representative is the New York City's Local Law 97, which has been developed since 2029 towards now, trying to regulate most of the building within the city towards the final target and set this ambiguous plan. And also in recent years, the UK, Canada, and also China also published their related zero carbon related standards, trying to regulate their own country situation towards a net zero carbon target. And two things to mention. The first, the New York City's local law 97 is the mandatory that most of the buildings within the New York City should follow, while all the others are voluntary for buildings to join. And also the ASHRAE 228 and the New York City's local law and even the UK standards is all performance-based certificate, which means actual performance data of the building should be submitted to fulfill all the requirements to achieve the certification. While the Canada and China standards, they can contain both the design and performance part, so they could make the certification separately. Because the carbon sector contains a series of different parts. In case of edge, it may include the energy consumption, the water consumption, and also the material usage. When we plot the different parts within these standards, we can see in some of the standards, they cover the water consumption and also waste management sector, but most of them requires to report the data without any pass and fail metrics set on this section. So our research focus on the first two, which is the energy consumption, and also the material consumption, which is the embodied carbon, which are the key point currently for all these standards. This is a chart we put all the pass and fail metrics of different standards in the same diagram. We can see at the bottom clearly in order to address how to achieve net zero, similar to what we understand that you have to make a carbon balance of what the actual emission or the operation should be covered by the offset credit you purchase. But at the same time, another series of pass and fail metrics are set separately to different parts of the building in related with the carbon balance. For example, some of standards set requirements on the direct requirements on the building energy efficiency or direct carbon emission control, or even the refrigerant emission, or even the on-site renewable energy generation part. Similarly, other limits are setting to the off-site. For example, the ASHRAE set requirements on the maximum procurement you could get from a source energy, and others also make different settings on what you can get from offsite. And also, because it's always a discussion about how to use or how to take advantages of this carbon offset procurement. We can see some of the standards trying to set up maximum you can get from the carbon offset, which shows the detailed balance of what you have to do within the building itself and what you can get from the financial market. So from this overall chart, we can understand the basic trend of this definition that apart from the basic carbon balance about operation and offset, a series of limit or pass and fail also set into different sects of buildings, which means in a sense, the carbon balance is not the only key issue to be addressed towards the net zero. In the UK's standard situation, they set a series of limits on different sectors. In the sense, the carbon offset is not necessary to be used in order to fulfill its basic standards of net zero. Filling all these requirements seems more important according to their framework. So what are the key or difference compared to the traditional or typical? Typically, this net zero carbon is developed from the net zero energy, which, for example, in the ASHRAE certification, first you have the baseline or the reference cases, and also you have the energy reduction target, for example, 40% of saving, and according to your operational emissions, you could pay the carbon offset credits to make balance. But for these new standards, the first thing clearly, they set clear requirements for the fossil fuel usage, which means the encourage of electrification. For example, the US national definition and Chinese standards also both mentioned both on-site and off-site should not use fossil fuels. The building should only be powered by clean energy. Well, the UK standards requires clearly not use fossil fuel on-site, while the district heating or other off-site requirements will be managed in other related standards. Similar things goes to the New York City. The proposed local law 145 to prohibits combustion-related fuel usage in future. Well, for the Canada standards, they also mentioned about trying to eliminate the on-site combustion, but they propose another option of a zero carbon transaction plan, which means in some cases you cannot eliminate it directly. You could make a plan to make a step to eliminate it in the future, and your actual work should be traced. So we can see from all these standards, there's a clear trend of eliminate the on-site fossil fuel emissions directly, which could be the define for net zero carbon buildings. And the second key changes is the embrace of this benchmarking approach. A clear thresholds are set based on this benchmarking approach for building energy efficiency. We can see in both of in all the 6 standards, a clear metrics based on different building types and different climate zones are set as the upper limit for all the operational energy emissions to be followed. And there might be slightly difference. The first line, these 3 standards, as discussed before, is mainly performance-based standard, which means you have to submit your actual operational data to get the certification, which means these figures should only be matched with operational data. But the bottom part, they accept both the design and the operational separately, so which means these figures could be achieved use the simulation model and simulation data, which seem to be slightly difference. And another slightly changes difference is the ASHRAE 228 emphasize more about the do not directly set limits on the buildings itself's energy. On the contrary, it sets the maximum procurement of off-site source energy. It is another way of trying to set limit. Well, the local law 97 set the cap for carbon emission caps, which directly regulate the carbon emission of different type of buildings. So, but we can see all these standards clearly trying to set up clear limits or thresholds for building energy efficiency apart from the other connections. When you could go to detail about this pattern for metrics, you realize in other sectors, they are all trying to set up requirements based on their own country situation. For example, as to embodied carbon, the UK standards set up upfront carbon limit for new works, retrofit works, and reportable works of different type of buildings, and even set up requirements for on-site PV system about the embodied carbon. Well, the Canada standards may have both ways. Either you follow the benchmark requirements or have a alternatively saving percentage from baseline. Also, different standards trying to regulate the refrigerants emission. In the UK, we can see according to their own country situation, they set different type of regulatory requirements with different systems. And also for on-site renewable generation, about in UK situations at minimum you have to create from on-site. Well, in the Chinese situation, they emphasize if on-site PV is adopted, at least 20% of generation should be used on-site. Also related, off-site energy use limit aside on the district heating total amount or the peak loads of different heating. You can see, apart from the building emphasis, there's other series of limits set as pattern 4 metrics, including embodied carbon, refrigerants, different district heating, etc. As to the carbon offset credits and the renewable energy certificates, we can see there's always a discussion of how to take advantage of this and how it is useful of this. We can see in the recent published standards, there are standards trying to make control or limit the use of this carbon offset credit. For example, U.S. national definition clearly mentioned about do not accept the carbon offset. Similar things in the UK standards, they do accept the offset, but they understand the offset as something else, as asset. They are not included at the basic certification framework. Well, the New York City's Local Law 97 and ASHRAE also set limits on the maximum you can get from carbon offset. On the other hand, the importance of using the renewable energy certificates is addressed, and in most standards, they address that the electricity you could use renewable energy certificates to make a balance of what the actual emission of electricity use, and also the bundled rack should be used to make sure the electricity is generated and used exactly to your projects. So when compare with what we traditional understanding or the previous concept, we can see briefly the trend of this definition changes. First, of course, eliminate the direct fossil fuel use on site. A second is try to identify the performance targets to address the energy efficiency separately. The third is to also include other limits for building-related emissions, maybe include embodied carbon, refrigerants, or district heating, or etc. Another thing is reduce or avoid this reliance on the carbon offset credits. When we go into detailed on these document settings, we could see how these documents are developed, trying to support these main changes. For example, in most of the standards, the annual operational data should be tracked in order to maintain this certification process. For example, in most of the standards, in order to achieve the certification, you have to submit the 12-month operational data to fulfill all the requirement. And also New York City's local law and UK's standards, and also Canada's performance-based standards. According to their requirement, the certification only valid for 1 year, and you should update your actual performance annually to keep these standards validate. And the UK, because UK system included the upfront carbon sector, they also developed some method how to integrate this embodied carbon into the annual submitted information, and how to make the embodied carbon regulated similar as performance information of the buildings. And based on that, we can see the importance of building the identification is improved. For example, in the UK's standards and also in the New York City's local law, the unique reference number of each building is addressed or the target to make the application of the standards. And based on that, the air-weighted method should be used to calculate your own building's energy and building energy efficient target. Because you may have a mix of different type of use, different type of building or use of different function. You have to calculate based on your real flow area distribution to make clear about this detailed requirement. And also the occupants of space is required, and the related figure should also be submitted to support your occupancy in order to achieve this certification. And this case, most of the energy use related with building is included in the certification. We can see the excluded situation on the top chart. In most cases, they emphasize the electric vehicles and maybe backup emergency is excluded from meeting this requirement. Also, in some situations, the heavy process load and external consumptions will fulfill the certain requirement would be excluded from this. And also, because all of them are carbon-related standards, they are trying to clarify how different type of energy use converted to the building itself, which means the responsibility behind this complicated system should be clarified. For example, in most of the standards, how the distributed energy sources should be calculated back to building, how the energy storage emission is calculated, how the combined heat and power, how the biofuels, energy from waste, and even hourly time of use electric emission, how this type of emission is calculated, it will be clarified. And special mention about the New York City's Local Law 97, because it is mandatory for most of the buildings within the city. So they have set a lot of efforts on how to clarify different type of energy use. For example, we can see in the bottom these series diagram that are proposed by the New York City's local government, how different type of energy distribution system, for example, the energy plant or how the plant of a combination with the electricity load, and how different type of energy distribution system in each situation, how to calculate the energy use, and in what situation the smart meter should be placed in order to achieve this calculation. And the right part also addressed how in different situations the on-site PV could be used as a reduction method, and how to calculate it within the boundary if the on-site PV is used for other regions decarbonization or related with this. So in a sense, it's really try a lot of efforts to address the responsibility behind the carbon emission of buildings according to these standards. From the previous slides, we can feel this trying to make strict requirement on this mission, but at the same time, we could find certain level of flexibility within these lines or requirements. They are really work a lot trying to allow a large range, a wide range of building to be aligned with. For example, the Canada and China's standards, most of them contain the design and performance phases. So you can use the simulation data to fulfill the requirement, and the performance data do not need to fulfill the figure requirement. Only the report is required in this situation. And also, there are also accepted different ways to fulfill this target, either benchmarking or energy saving percentage, or even the other strategies based on their own country's building code and working flows. As to the UK's standard, you can see in the details that they are trying to exclude some certain type of room. For example, they mentioned about currently certain building types, district heating and cooling requirement is excluded because of the lack of data. And also in certain type of building, for example, laundry in the residence, commercial residence or conference center in the hotels, or even waste storage and management cases in the retail. In these cases, because there's actual energy performance is quite hard to estimate and the lack of information. So currently, they are excluded from meeting the actual requirement if the separate smart meter is set. Well, in the New York City situation, they propose good faith effort and also target adjustment applications, different methods. For example, if your building faces, for example, 24 hours operation or even a high density of occupation or different challenges to meet the requirement cap, you could make a plan for the future to illustrate different reduction strategies. So if you follow this strategy in the future, you could contemporarily exclude it from the current carbon emission cap. And another flexibility also is applied, similar to the concept developed by the ISO, which is like carbon neutrality aligned method. For example, the UK system for the retrofit operational energy, they developed the step-by-step approach, which means you are allowed to make your actual reduction strategy phase by phase, and your actual energy emission will reduce according to their trace and to achieve the final target, which means you do not necessarily finish all the efforts directly once, which could allow wider, let's say, other sector to starting this decarbonization process. Similar things in the local law 97, because they set different time period, different level of cap for different type of building to follow. In this case, in the currently, which means most of the buildings should make comparison for the reduction in the future. And currently, they are making different every efforts based on their own situation and to make choice of what different strategies could be used. So after review all these informations, we could feel on one hand, these standards trying to getting strict. Of course, multiple pass and fall requirements are set on emissions, apart from this traditional carbon balance of emission and the carbon offset. And also the performance metric is traced annually with benchmarking to make sure the actual emission of the building will not over in some level. At the same time, also they're trying to make more flexibilities. For example, they're trying to accept or allow certain type of energy consumption in special contexts, and also create this step-by-step pathway to conduct retrofits. So in this case, we could somehow feel this this trend, or how to achieve this balance between this new concept is try to balance within the benchmark context to manage all type of emissions to gain a new balance within this these new definitions. The second part is about the metric comparison, because clearly the performance-based target or the energy building energy efficiency is the key figures to requirements for buildings according to this effort. So we are trying to understand how these figures are set and how they may impact on the actual building in the actual situation. So we're trying to collect data from different cities. For US, Canada, or even UK cities, we could have some public availability city scale building data set to plot the actual building energy use of different cities. But for the emerging markets, currently, there's not enough city scale data. So we try to collect information from a government report and research paper to make to try to demonstrate their basic distribution of these different energies. And also we have a chance to collaboration with EDGE. We could use the EDGE system because EDGE provides a series of calculation system for most of the cities within the world, and within its own cities, these cities target have already normalized and have a certain level of comparison somehow. So we are trying to, based on the ASHRAE target, to make a comparison of different cities to understand basically how these impacted are. You can see for these US and UK cities, we could download directly about the information of each unique individual buildings and plot them directly in this chart of the operational energy use. For example, this chart is the office building for each cities, and the dark red line here is the edge energy target, which is the 60% reduction from the base case baseline. For the emerging markets, we're trying to collect information from public government report or research papers, trying to also to make basic comparison of these standards. Currently we collect from Vietnam, South Africa, and Indonesia, etc. data. So when we plot all these 12 cities together, we could somehow starting this a comparison and start this understanding of how these standards required. And we'll try to use the edge target to make an alignment. You can see this dot line. If we align all the edge target directly, we could somehow compare each city's energy distribution, if it is higher than edge or lower than edge, and what is the this trend or the difference between this target. For example, in the Brazil situation, the most of the city is like 80 kilowatt hour higher than the edge target. While in the Shanghai situation, maybe 20% of the building is currently performance lower than the edge target, 20 kilowatt hour lower than the project. This comparison may be not precise comparison between countries, but consider that that baseline have an alignment of the climate and also behavior. So in this case, we could have a basic comparison to understand how the connection with the simulation data and the real world distribution as a concept. When we plot the carbon emission information of this situation here, we could clearly see that, for example, in the Brazil or Canada situation, or even Los Angeles, they may have a green carbon emission factors. So their actual carbon emission of the building of operational energy is quite low when compared to others. But again, as discussed before, the requirement for building efficiency is focused on the energy use intensity or the energy use itself. So no matter how green the grid is, the building itself's efficiency should be addressed at this time. So within this framework, we plot different standards requirements set on the same chart. Again, this is the office building category. Briefly, for example, the UK system, you can see there's a diagonal slope. They set different requirements for operational building based on different years, which means currently they have a relatively higher level of requirement, but in the future, about 2050, the requirement of the actual emission is quite strict. And they set up this metrics to guide their own country's decarbonization process. As to the US national definition, we use the Andy-Star portfolio manager system, and the dot line is for the retrofit, and the bottom, the straight line is for the new building, which demonstrates the 90% higher than the existing building distribution. Chinese standard also proposed a benchmark, but they separately propose a large office and a small office. So there are two requirements for new buildings in the office sector. South Africa currently do not publish the national government level clearly target for net zero building definition, but we could see some government-based supported report that discuss how strict or what the energy efficiency should be. So currently we reference a report Getting to Zero 2020 guide could see how their vision about understanding of this FFC. So within this comparison, we could clearly have the baseline energy that the edge target somehow seems reasonable for defining as energy efficiency for net zero carbon building in this office sector. You can see the Canada situation, the UK situation towards the 2050, and also even the New York City's definitions are all similar to edge target at this time. But we have to also realize that the emerging markets tends to have lower actual energy use, so they tend to have a relatively lower emission or stricter requirements when compared with to others. And we go into detailed comparison of this, because most of the standards address the importance of electrification. When we calculate the electrification scenario of different cities, we can see clearly how these targets are set related to the existing buildings. Electrification process may lead to a reduction of the energy use intensity, which may reduce the strictness of achieving this target. And also at the same time, different standards may have different regulation on how to calculate this energy use intensity. For example, in the Canada and UK situation, and even the South Africa's report, the on-site PV is excluded from calculation this emission. Well, in the US standards and also Chinese standards, the on-site PV is included. So which means for different type of office building, they have different type of challenge. For an office building that have a large scale but with a small rooftop, different standards may remain the same. But when the towns that have a relatively small scale but with large rooftop, they may show the different level of strictness within different standards. When it goes to the hotel situation, we can see it clearly different from the traditional, the previous office situation, that the simulation information of hotels tends to be overestimated the actual performance of these hotel buildings, especially in these emerging markets. For example, Brazil, Vietnam, or even China, over 50% of the existing building is have a lower actual EUI when compared with to the edge and target. Similar things goes to the UK situation. So at this time, we can see the benchmark approach or performance-based target maybe have more advantages to address the energy efficiencies for hotel sectors, because they have better reflection on the real world emission of the buildings. Another building sector is the shopping mall. Going to the shopping mall, things goes another change, because shopping mall is a unique building type that the real operational energy really depend on what inside it have. For example, if a shopping mall contains mostly the selling product, they may have a relatively low level of emission, but to contain more of a restaurant or supermarket or a large level of storage, cold storage, their actual emission would be quite higher. So in this sense, we can see the UK situation and the Chinese situation. The target they're setting is not similar to the previous hotel and office situation, which means they set a relatively higher limit when compared with the existing situation. So which means when using the benchmarking to set target, you still have to understand how this targets impact on this existing situation and how to make this guidance. And another thing addressed is this uncertainty, because for example, when we plot the Chicago's actual data, the left is one of the 10 years of operational data of a building. You can see the weather normalized site EUI is not always the same. When we use the coefficients of variance, which is the standard deviation of EUI by the mean of this UI, you can see there's uncertainty over 20%. When we plot all the cities, different buildings in this chart at the right side, you can see for different type of building, each building also show a different level of uncertainty when use the actual performance of these buildings. There's like over 10 to 20% of uncertainty facing these figures. It also raises how we understand these performance-based data and how these targets are. For the embodied carbon, currently, UK standards may have some data we could make basically comparison. We plot their own database from RICS and their benchmark setting for upfront carbon. We could see for recent years that target set is not very strict, but for the 2050's target, this set an extremely strict requirement on the upfront carbon for different type of building to be achieved. When we go into detailed about to read this decarbonization roadmap, we could somehow understand how they are expecting a strong relationship of this embodied carbon decarbonization process with the supply chain. Because in the left chart, you can see the estimation in the future, the renovation project around 2050 and maybe lower construction after that. But at the right chart, you can see the estimation of different parts of materials, how they could achieve a decarbonization in the future. So it means a strong connection with the supply chain in this sense. So after going through all these figures, we could realize the simulation target and the benchmark metrics and performance behavior is really a complicated situation, have a connection between each other. For office building, the edge energy target could be used or could be seen as the reasonable target to define the energy efficiency for net zero energy buildings, even towards the future. But at the same time, for hotels or for others, the performance-based targets would have more advantages because they have better connection with the real world situation. But at the same time, the emerging markets tend to have lower energy use intensity, but it does not always mean a higher efficiency. Because we can see in different types, they have a detailed relationship with how the type of the building is divided, how the area is calculated. So which means the benchmarking and performance targets should be examined detailedly case by case in different sectors. And also embodied carbon benchmarking currently is practicable and possible. And to address the reduction strategies seems to have a greatly depend on the supply chain. The third part is we're trying to conduct a series of interviews from experts. So we're trying to understand better how these changes and concepts will impact in a practical situation. And thanks to EDGE's global think tank, we have a chance to connect it to experts from both the emerging markets and also China. Currently, we have connected interviews including Vietnam, India, Colombia, elections over 13 experts. And it is an ongoing interview. So any audience here is interested in our research, welcome to contact us to join this interview. We are really interested in to understand how this abstract concept may have potential impact or contribute to the real world situation. And the interview is mainly lasts for about 1 hour, about semi-structured, and 4 parts, mainly on the overall definition of net zero and the key metrics, also framework and also embodiment will be discussed. And we're trying to use a 2-level of coding to organize all our informations to see these key features. And this research is still ongoing, but we could see some preliminary findings at a certain point of view. First, most of the experts discuss about the UI. Currently, UI is suitable for make these comparisons, but at the same time, almost already is addressing this how it could impact by the occupant behavior and other related informations. In fact, most of the emerging markets also trying to collect operational energy information, trying to set up benchmarking data, but it's still challenging on this process facing of the large variety of uncertainty behind these data. So at the point, UI may be suitable to make comparisons at starting point, but it's still the data itself is insufficient to set up these comprehensive benchmark. The knowledge on how this normalization method could fit in each city or each country's unique situation is important to make these information really get connected. The second topic is about this performance target. During the interview, we realized that building or building development and buildings have a unique workflow that the key building energy efficiency strategy is based on decisions with a holistic balance of expertise, project condition, and also the energy target. So at this point, no matter the target is a saving percentage or performance-based target, the decision may remain the same. And the operational data could be used to improve the simulation and other tools, but not radically change the decision-making process. But then after the detailed analysis of this discussion, we realized the performance data are really trying to define or expand our understanding of energy efficiency because they have a better connection with the actual performance of this building. At this terms, because of the UI or the related figures, it is easier to make comparisons to others. So it means during the whole process of design and construction, the target itself is more clear for all the sectors related with building. This decision could have a better connected with the actual performance. At the same time, it raises another consideration of how it could take advantages of this performance information. Experts mentioned that if we have a better understanding of this uniqueness of performance behavior, we could select better or more suitable energy efficiency strategies designed or more suitable for this specific pattern of using. In this case, really expand the building energy efficiencies to a performance level. As to the pathway concept or the step-by-step concept, currently the concept itself sounds good. Most experts mentioned that because for emerging markets, most of the projects cannot achieve all the carbon decarbonization strategies once. So if there's a pathway or there's a chance to make different plans, there will be much more easier for them to be followed. But it also addressed the importance of ownership because the plan make a strong connection what the current use and what the future pathway it is. So the ownership or the responsibility behind that is also addressed. And technically, this concept, we realized how to take the advantages of this concept really a case-by-case situation. For example, in our discussion, there are cases that for similar client, they're trying to face different situations. They have to figure out different strategies to take advantages of this step, either floor by floor or facade by changings. So it really depends on how this concept is understood and how it could be combined in the real world situation. As to the embodied carbon, currently the emerging markets do not have enough data for open the discussion of this embodied carbon. So at a point, the detailed connection with the supplying industry to open up discussion about embodied carbon seems important to starting this process. At the same time, we realize in the project decision, the embodied carbon tends to not set in the first level of priority. So which means how to integrate this embodied carbon reduction strategy in the other overall decision-making process will be benefits to make really a progress of reduction in this process. So clearly, during these interviews, we kind of feeling clearly the practical situation is quite complicated and case by case. So in the sense, how the knowledge is converted to the situation is quite important in the situation. Traditionally, we may have a lot of knowledge on how to conduct the carbon reduction design or strategies to fit in different cases. But we still need knowledge beyond the technology or beyond that. For example, how to confirm the performance-based target to establish how to normalize the unique context of this uncertainty of the variability of operational data. And also the operational UI tends to be lower in these emerging markets. How to take advantages of this unique behavioral advantages and convert it back into design strategies is also something to be thought. And similar things to the step-by-step reduction method. The concept itself is promising, but how it can work properly is also should be operating in a case-by-case bias. And at this time, the knowledge may impact a lot on this situation. So finally, we are trying to make a kind of a conclusion. Because during our interviews, experts always told us that, for example, they think they can achieve net zero tomorrow with carbon offset. They do not understand what net zero means. They're trying to add 3 times PV to achieve a net zero. That is not what net zero means. So we are continually asking ourselves what exactly that net zero concept is. When we plot a different pattern, what expected from the market, what traditionally we use from the strategy offset, and what the current defining, we could realize that the key things within these different phases or different types is to address the importance or the key role of the energy efficiency or the efficiency within the carbon context. No matter how we could achieve from different markets, the building itself, the effectiveness should be addressed separately. Related with that, we realized that we really entered the point to have a better connection with the real operational behavior. So how to better understanding or take advantage of this unique behavior also raise a question to our understanding of the energy efficiency. So in this case, the holistic thinking will be importance will be addressed in order to achieve a whole life cycle for buildings' carbon energy efficiency. So finally, we are trying to conclude our these trends within the framework to understand how or what the trend of the net zero, how it may impact. Clearly, the first is the prerequisite, or the building have to manage all the different type of fossil fuel emission, clearly either eliminated on-site or eliminate totally. And also the building's actual performance will be traced and aligned to a certain type of target, and the actual performance will be traced annually to make sure the actual works properly. And also, all constraints may be used when there's strategies or you adopted, maybe constraints on the energy efficiency or the requirement on the maximum on procurement in order to upgrade it or improve the reduction or removal credits that make the reduction of the actual building. So in a sense, we could somehow discuss or open the discussion about this opportunity for emerging markets under these definitions. Although we understand for emerging markets it's very challenge in the real situation to achieve overall target, but upon these definitions and discussions, we realize there is some unique opportunities. For example, first is the electrification. Emerging markets still under decarbonization progress. So when compared with others, with US, so they may have less technical challenges on this overall electrification and to adopt to different technologies. Well, attitudes towards the actual performance. The emerging markets tends to have lower operational data. So it seems to be a unique advantage for them in this long path towards the carbon neutral, and how they could positively take advantages that to address their own unique way of and address the energy efficiency would be valued for emerging markets. And also in the selection of strategies or credits, emerging markets have already collected a rich knowledge on passive design strategies and cost-effective measures. So a better operational of how the strategy into a unique situation would be another opportunity or benefits for these. So behind all this, the important thing is knowledge and the knowledge beyond what we traditionally understand of technology. Maybe the knowledge how to understand this performance behavior or occupancy, how to take advantage of this behavior, how to negotiate with the real world situation, take advantage of this new concept is important to achieve this new concept. Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is current our research findings, and our interview is not finished. And if our guests is interested our research, welcome just contact us. And I will hand over to Ed team to introduce it.
Thank you so much, Wu. Maybe before Adalberto, I wanted to thank you, Holly, and the team here, and the fantastic work that has been done by Harvard. It's really, really eye-opening to understand all the aspects of this phenomenon and the advancement of different standards and different countries, and how this is an important challenge, but at the same time, even from implementation point of view, it's a big challenge. The few things that I learned from this, I wanted to reflect on and then hand it over to Adalberto. One of them is that, understanding the difference between design-based as well as performance-based processes. The way, for example, local law 97 in New York looks at performance targets. That's really interesting to learn from for many countries that we operate in. In many countries we operate in emerging markets, the challenges obviously is not only zero carbon, but also energy security and ensuring that there's energy access. So combining energy access, energy security, and low carbon development is really what we need to focus on. The way that EDGE looks at these processes is a combination of design and performance. When we look at the design reduction of energy and then having the EDGE advanced level and then having the performance, low carbon performance. The last thing that I want to mention is, you mentioned very good point too about being lenient or strict. Obviously, there's a school of thought of being perfect and strict, but doing that a lot of time we may achieve 1 or 2 buildings with the best, strict conditions. However, if you look at achieving market transformation, having 1 or 2 buildings is not going to transform the market. So at the other side of the curve, if we are too lenient, then nobody will do anything, right? So the idea is where we can find the balance between setting achievable targets, but at the same time understanding the country context, right? As I mentioned, country context in each country we operate is different. For example, the requirements in Brazil would be very different from India. And that's what we are trying to do, trying to find what is the right balance in achieving these elements. Here, I'll hand it over to you, Adalberto, if you can quickly run us through our zero carbon standard, and then we can open the floor for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit, and thank you very much for the Harvard team. Indeed, it's been a great experience and a great learning opportunity to hear from your results and to discuss the preliminary results. There's a lot more data that you have gathered, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. But what our task from the IFC team was then is to use that data and then come up with that balance approach and future-proof approach that Amit was discussing. So as a result, we recently released new updated user guides with information about the zero carbon standard for projects from January, applying for zero carbon from January 1st, 2025. And there is a few changes that reflect our understanding and our middle point based on this research task. So for example, to qualify for EDGE Advanced for zero carbon, buildings need to be qualified as EDGE Advanced. That means the 40% energy reduction with compared to business as usual. And we are opening the door for this or equivalent, which will be looking into performance-based certification. So that's something that we're going to start piloting, and that's something that we would like to rate efficiency as well from operational information. So that's something that it's coming. We are working on it, and we are quite excited about. And from the perspective of the use of carbon offsets, so now organizations are required to have a plan. They cannot just rely on carbon offsets and then say, yes, in 2 years, I will just renew my carbon offsets and buy more. But now they have to demonstrate that they have a plan to reduce their dependency of them at organizational level, and then a roadmap at building level that should explain how you will phase out on-site emissions, how you will maximize on-site generation, and ultimately how the carbon offset credits for that specific buildings will be minimized over time. So this opens this time window for organizations to adapt, to plan, and to make sure this process becomes cost effective rather than just trying to be radical and change everything at once. The offsite energy agreements, they must be now to qualify long-term in nature, so at least 10 years contracts. This includes PPA, for example, and that is to ensure that there is a long-term investment and commitment with renewable providers. RECs, renewable energy certificates, they might not qualify as offsite energy because of the previous condition, but they can still qualify as carbon offsets for electricity emissions. The carbon offsets list has been revised. It's can be sourced from Gold Standard, whereas Verified Carbon Standard, American Carbon Registry, and Climate Action Reserve, which are the whitelisted carbon offset providers by the IFC. So there's an alignment there, and they can only be used for commercial and industrial buildings. And this is because we need the commitment from an organization behind to ensure that the carbon offsets can be reduced over time. That's something that residential buildings cannot do, for example, and that's why there is no carbon offsets available for them. And finally, there is the introduction of preliminary edge zero carbon certification, which can be granted to projects that achieve preliminary edge advanced. So they have 2 years to then complete edge advanced, and then they can claim the edge zero carbon certification. But in the meantime, they can have this preliminary certification that allows them to use carbon offsets and then claim edge zero carbon while they are implementing their retrofit projects. That's the highlights of the changes or evolution of the edge zero carbon standard. That's and yeah, if there's any question, we are happy to go into more detail. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Adal and Omid. It was a pleasure working with you. I believe we're going to have time for a question and answer now. Philip, do you want to take the lead on that?
Sure. So we did actually have a question specifically on RECs. So do you require RECs to be additional? In many parts of the world, renewables are no longer only cheaper than new fossil fuels, they're cheaper than the existing fossil fuels as well. Do you think this is less relevant in countries where grids are expanding rapidly? And feel free, whoever wants to take that one.
Chu, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not quite follow this question. Could you explain again? On the because
so I think it's the cost levels of renewables. That in many countries, they're not only cheaper than the new fossil fuels, so if you install them, but they're already cheaper than existing fossil fuel options as well.
Yeah. Briefly explain to our, because currently we collected the information from these 6 standards, which do not means all the world will transit in the same direction. Each country have this unique consideration balance within this framework. During our research, for example, in the New York cities, they have a requirement on the REC, and they have the REC is related directly to the 2 new built projects of 2 electricity line. But for the Chinese or the Canada situation, they do not set a clear maximum requirement on the REC. So, which means you have a wider option to use, to have a different choice. So basically, for different standards, you may realize they have a different level of strictness, that they have this balance on their attitudes towards. And also, they could reflect different attitudes toward how they would guide the buildings towards. That is what we learn from the standards. Clearly, they are all the economic impact is behind all these strategies or decisions are made. But when we read these standards or settings, we could somehow understand these detailed standards are setting just to testify or how it could have a stronger or lesser connection with different sectors. That is the unique situation for different countries. Am I clear?
Yeah, I think that covers it. I think we have another one. Omid, if I can call you out on that one, I think that's a very interesting one. What is the role of incentives to support faster uptake by asset owners to seek EDGE certification? And related to that, the role of the insurance industry. I know, as the lead for BRI, you definitely have thoughts on that. If a building is not insurable, is it not bankable?
Philippe, for me, right? This one.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the incentives as a mechanism to improve or fast track change. However, we have to be careful that incentives do not become a poison for the system, right? So, for example, for a little kid to have some medicine, you give them a bit of sugar, but you can't give them too much sugar that it harms them, right? So the same way, the incentives in the market cannot be overdone. We have to be careful that not to provide incentive to the point that people, they say, if you don't give me incentive, I'm not going to do anything, right? So that's a difficulty element around incentives. But through our financial institutions program, we have a program called MAGIC, that's Market Accelerator for green construction. And through that, we offer lower interest rate financing for projects that are green certified. So any green certified project in target countries, in certain countries, we have around 20, 25 countries. They can go to the local banks and access better financing. And that has shown very good results in many countries. We have seen fast track penetration of the buildings, green buildings. Insurance is another angle. Obviously, we have in Colombia, we have one insurance company that provides better insurance for buildings that are certified. However, insurance is a longer process, and for insurance companies, they also look at resilience of the assets, right? How would you define better resilient buildings for insurance? But it's a really important question in the sense that how can we align incentives not only from financial institutions, it can also come from cities, it can come from national governments, for example, extra floor or better permitting conditions. It doesn't need to be always financial incentives. From financial institutions and banks, from insurance companies, and how all this together can help to move the market faster. I'm happy to explore these ideas more in certain countries if there are interest. Thank you.
Yeah, speaking of interest, I see in the chat there's a lot of interest in zero carbon. I think, Omid, we should be planning another zero carbon webinar. I think that is probably very timely to keep the discussion going. Following up on that, for the whole team, where are you seeing biggest adoption of net zero carbon by number of buildings? What are the key drivers for adoption? What does the research say on that location, and what have you heard drives the adoption?
I can speak a little bit to the US. So in certain cities or certain states, we mentioned New York City here, but there are others. There are requirements for net zero carbon by a certain date. So for example, in Cambridge, where we are right now, we're talking about 2035 for large buildings. Some places have a goal of all buildings by 2050. So I think I've seen in the US that driving some drive towards net zero carbon because it will be eventually mandated. And so I've definitely seen even in new buildings, it's switching the decision from maybe putting in fossil fuel heating systems to putting in electrified systems now so that the building is poised to take advantage of the greening of the grid. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a US centric view, but I'll ask the team, where else have you seen a lot of adoption of net zero buildings.
I can then continue on our experience from the edge perspective. It's organizations that manage assets that they have to push for this net zero. So REITs, for example, they tend to they are the most interested parties trying to make sure that the emissions related to the operations of their building assets are minimized. This is linked to future needs or upcoming needs of scope 2 and 3 reporting from organizational level. So I would say that's a big driver. And regions that are adopting sustainability disclosure frameworks are the ones that are taking the lead in our perspective, from what I've seen on its zero carbon buildings.
And can I also add some on this? Because after all this research of these documents and after this interview, I personally realized our concept or understanding of a net zero seems could be, let's say, widened or could be a wider concept than adopting all the technology strategies and improve all the envelope, because in the term we face the practical or the operational data, we could also understand different type of behavior as low carbon or related. So in a sense, the boundary of the net zero could be widened, that could be larger than just the envelope or the facility and the structure, and at the same time, it seems not necessary for all the existing building to achieve the same target at the final and for the final, and the building sector itself have its own responsibility. For example, eliminating the on-site emission and control the to regulate the overall energy performance situation. Upon finish all these requirements, the responsibility of building sector is mainly achieved, and the overall carbon target is like a combination of all sector of different boundaries. So we could connect it with other using different tools, financing tools to generate the process, but not necessary for all the building itself to follow the same exact technology target at the current level. Yeah.
I want to add there because that's a very interesting point about this, the boundary of what the net zero. We have some cases where there's an emergency plan, and that the building manager switches on at peak hours to reduce the peak load charges. And there could be an argument made there where you say, okay, maybe I'm saving an entire new power plant to come on by me switching my on-site generation diesel power plant. And that's quite interesting, right? To because it could be true. It's just hard to measure and hard to find that balance. But so definitely there is that angle where operations must be looked into sometimes bigger perimeter, bigger scope, and understand that to make sure that overall emissions are being reduced. And yeah, quite interesting point there.
Excellent. I see we have another question with regards to smart meters and better performance of assets in the long term, and then also related to that question, whether that could be tied to green mortgages, financing, better asset performance. Who wants to take that? I think that actually very nicely ties into a webinar that we had last week. speaking about the Market Accelerator for Green Construction Research Seminar. I can include a link for all attendees to that webinar as well. Strongly recommend showing the latest research on smart metering pilot studies that our colleagues have been doing across the world as well. Mead, do you want to speak to smart meters maybe? Or Adal?
In terms of smart metering for all buildings?
Yes, and then specifically with regards to green mortgages. So I'm guessing as a proof of performance.
Yeah. I think there are different difficulty when it comes to smart metering. I mean, the principle and the idea is quite easy. When you look at it from the overall design perspective, you feel that technology is there and it's very easy to install smart meters on electricity or even on gas or water. But the reality when it comes to implementation is quite challenging. And I'll explain why, because depending on the country and depending on the conditions, for example, we have been doing a research study with our economist VPU on how to do smart metering in South Africa, Colombia, and Indonesia. And we have seen a number of challenges there. The challenges that we are facing, for example, number one can be the technology itself, because while the technology is available, but when it comes to the companies that they can provide the technology, reliable technology, is very limited. The number of companies are very limited. The second thing is that when it comes to implementation, we have seen, for example, there's a number of things that needs to be considered. For example, the solar energy. Sometimes solar energy goes directly to the grid. Sometimes it goes to the use in the building. Sometimes it goes to heat the water. Sometimes it goes to the general distribution of energy in the household. So metering that and making sure that that meter is, it's not a single meter. You then end up having multiple meters in the building. Then, on top of that, you can add challenges, for example, for the homes that they use the bottled gas for like LPG for cooking, where you cannot really meter those easily unless you know how many of them being used every month. So there are lots of these layers that comes in to answer. So I wish this was as easy as being able to install 1 or 2 meters and then for the banks to read those data. But the reality is it's much more complex than that. And then you add on top of that the people's perception, whether people they want to have meters in their homes or not. But they may refuse because they say we don't want. They have the privacy rights. They have also limitations that they feel maybe you are coming from the tax office after them or whatever, right? So there are a number of complexity that comes in. That's why we believe that while a smart metering can be a personal choice, it's very hard to say there's a central smart metering for everyone that have access to the banks. The other point, for commercial buildings, smart metering can be an interesting model. The challenges we have seen with the building management systems that are connected to smart metering, maintaining those systems are very complex, and keeping a maintenance team on those commercial buildings maintained and make sure that those systems operate properly is very important. So I'll just stop here with this so that you see some of the reality checks on the ground.
Excellent. I think we've mostly covered a lot of ground. We've covered most of the questions. Do we have any final statements, any final comments from any of the panelists before we close out? And again, I will also remind everyone online, we have the QR code up on the screen. I've also shared the survey link in the chat. We'd be very grateful to get all of your feedback for these events as we do them. And I believe Holly and Chu are very eagerly looking for participants in the study as well. So any of the experts online, feel free to get in touch with them. The contact details are also on the right of the screen there.
Thank you. Yes, that was one of the questions in the chat said, does this study integrate social and cultural characteristics to examine the associated performance criteria? And I think that's the crux of the challenge. So we have two sides of the extreme. So we have something like Local Law 97 in New York, where it's mandatory, it applies to almost all buildings, but we know a lot about the context of those buildings, versus something like an EDGE zero carbon needs to apply to a really wide range of circumstances. And I think we've barely scratched the surface of understanding that. And so that's one of the reasons why we're asking if you can help us understand what are some of the cultural and social constraints that we might be working in different emerging markets. We would love to hear from you. So please feel free to put your email in the chat or to contact me or Chu. And thank you so much for your attention. I really want to sincerely thank the IFC team, who were great partners in this research. So you've heard from Omid, Adalberto, Philip, but also Janice Tan, who's on this call. So thank you to all of you for helping us. Thank you, Chu, and thank you everyone for being here.